Okay, thank you very much. I'll get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Hester Paul. I'm the National Director of a program called Eco-Healthy Childcare, which is based within the national organization Children's Environmental Health Network. We are a national nonprofit in Washington, D.C., although I am located in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I'm having a hard time advancing the slide again. There we go. So the plan for today is to first provide you, give me 1 second here, with an overview of what is children's environmental health to make sure we're all on the same page of definitions. We are going to also look at current best practices from the Council for Professional Recognition and existing standards that pertain to environmental health and look for alignment between the two organizations. Where I'm going to share some professional development opportunities that you guys can be involved in if you would like, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. We also have Veronica on the webinar from the Council for Professional Recognition, so she and I can just tag team those Q&A at the very end of the presentation. This is going to be recorded if you'd like to share it with your colleagues afterwards. All right, so the mission of Children's Environmental Health Network is to protect ultimately all young children where they're spending their time. So that could include schools, that can include childcare, churches, their homes, but really thinking about how do you think from a child's lens, and how do we create the healthiest environments? And if we are doing that for young children, then we know that these environments would be healthier and safer for all people, regardless of age. The Children's Environmental Health Network, the national nonprofit that hosts this program, has been around for 30 years. And we're looking at that intersection of health and environmental hazards. So if we are exposed to pesticides on the front lawn or toxic chemicals that might be in our baby bottles that we're using, or consumer products such as our makeup, lotions, or shampoos, how does that intersection of those chemicals and those products interact with our health and well-being? So as an organization, again, we've been around 30 years. We are working on many different levels. The organization as a whole is thinking on behalf of children. The program that I'm going to present on today is thinking about childcare specifically. But we want to promote preventative research. So instead of having people be exposed to chemicals or heavy metals like lead and mercury, and then becoming sick and us trying to support those individuals with becoming healthier, it's obviously better to see if we can just prevent these bad exposures from the beginning. So a lot of our work is working alongside colleagues at universities, people in health departments across the country, people at the Environmental Protection Agency, the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, to really say, how do we follow the research right now and help people identify and prevent exposures before they happen? We try to work towards creating policy, and that way it's not just somebody making a good decision for one moment, but if you set a policy into action, then you are creating good for the long term. In the context of childcare, we've done a lot of work with incorporating environmental health into childcare licensing regulations at the state level, into quality rating improvement system standards at the state level, and then also through national accreditation or the National Resource Center for Health and Safety in Early Care and Education. So again, how do we integrate these best practices into standards within the systems and structures within childcare so that for the long term, people have best practice policies to keep kids safe? So Eco-Healthy Childcare is what we're going to focus on today. I've been in my position for 13 years, and this is an award-winning program that, again, is very much science-based. We're following the science to say, okay, what can we do to improve our childcare environments right away? And we ideally want to be looking at strategies that are either free or low cost, because we know there's not a lot of extra money within childcare, whether it be family childcare, center-based Head Start, or early Head Start. And we really we're the only national program that's really thinking about this intersection. So within your own states, you might be thinking, oh, there's a lead abatement program, or there's a program that thinks about radon, but there is not another national program that's thinking comprehensively of all of the possible environmental health hazard exposures that could be happening within a childcare environment. There are several programs that are looking at school-age children, so what's happening within our elementary schools, but they aren't looking at childcare. And why we think childcare is important is because these are our youngest children, right? So we're thinking about the context of birth through age 5, typically in childcare. They're extremely vulnerable, and we'll go talk about how these folks are different than adults. So again, just think about this as being a nonprofit program. All the resources are free. Everything we have are now available in English and Spanish. And we have a national advisory committee that kind of serves as our board of directors, but individuals from the National Association of Family Childcare, Childcare Aware, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, kind of all of those big national names really help to support our work and advise what we think is the best thing to be doing moving forward. Okay, and so the Council for Professional Recognition has been a partner of ours in this last 18 months. We were awarded a grant from the JPB Foundation, and then the Council for Professional Recognition are receiving some of those grant funds to really work together to think about how can we extend the resources that we have and the support to the community of you all. And so this is just one of our objectives today, is offering you guys this information. So how have we worked to change the childcare system? Well, if you think about your own exposure, you're probably aware that the childcare system in general does not include environmental health related info or offer professional development about environmental health to the extent that maybe you would need. And so when I use the terms environmental health, I'm thinking about any chemical outside of a person, outside of a child, outside of the health consultant or the program director that could be impacting the health and well-being of a child or the provider in the system. And so what we want to be doing is thinking about, again, how can we work within the systems of childcare to hopefully prevent exposures? And as mentioned before, we've been integrating a lot of better, more comprehensive, safer standards into existing systems like national accreditation or state licensing, so that people are now thinking about environmental health more in the context of health and safety. So yes, it's important to make sure that we don't have intruders, for example, or we keep doors locked so kids don't run outside into streets. But we also need to be thinking about, are kids being exposed to lead from water, or are people spraying pesticides when it's not necessarily, maybe it's not necessary and they could be harming the health and well-being of a young child. Another example is just thinking about playground equipment. Is the playground equipment that's being used safe for children, or have people ever considered what it's made out of and whether or not there could be another safer alternative? So I think what I would say is that there's kind of a lot of work that needs to be done. The good news is people are on the same page. So again, children's environmental health, the definition of that just means children's surroundings, the air they're breathing, the food they're consuming, the carpet or the furniture, the built environment of which they're spending time. All of these different factors can influence the health and well-being of a young child. If we just think about indoor air quality as an example, think about anything that could be sprayed within an environment that often these chemicals are lingering around and then we're breathing them in. So kind of a bad example would be aerosols. So any type of aerosol that you might be using, like PAM for cooking, hairspray, deodorant, these particles are so little and microscopic that they spew out. They do the job you want, right? So maybe they keep you from perspiring, or maybe they keep it from the pan sticking. But then the problem is those teeny chemicals and the tiny droplets are remaining in the air for many days, weeks, or months, and they're becoming suspended so that we are breathing them in. So we want to be more thoughtful about, do we need to be using a product? And if so, could we be choosing something that's healthier, either in the contents and or maybe the way it's applied? So for example, a direct spray of some kind of chemical or solution for sanitizing, disinfecting could be better, or a kind of a wipe, but we would want to always avoid any type of aerosol. So evidence is continuing to grow around the negative health effects resulting from exposures to environmental health hazards. And what we need to do is be kind of productive and protective about it and move forward instead of waiting for there to be a problem and then responding afterwards. Okay, so we know children are not just little from looking at research. Children are more vulnerable to environmental health hazards such as dirty water, climate change, harmful chemicals found in everyday products like lotion or toothpaste or sunscreen, let's say, because their organs are still developing. So they're in that rapid stage of development. Just think about how much your body has changed, let's say in the last 6 years, and then think about a young baby through infancy through 6 years, and there's much more rapid change. So what we know with that is that they're developing their organs, their brains, their lungs, their heart, everything. And when you're in an extreme phase of development, you have more capacity ultimately to be taking in these chemicals and growing with the chemicals instead of having kind of your fully developed self. We also know their metabolisms are not as efficient. So they're not able to process when they are exposed to chemicals as quickly as an adult is. They also have early chronic exposures that could pose a later risk. So what that means is if they're exposed, let's say, to lead and paint, then they have many years of which to become sick. So, and we want to think about how long were they exposed to the chemical, maybe the lead paint, to what degree, was it the entire room that was painted in lead-based paint, or was it just a windowsill, and how old were they at the time? So there's many different factors that we have to think about when we think about protecting a young child. They also have higher exposures to chemicals because of their common and natural behaviors. These are very appropriate, but think of a little toddler, they're picking things up, they're mouthing them, they're putting things in their mouths. Adults are not typically doing this. Well, what happens if they're picking up a toy, let's say, that has been in the dirt outside? Fine, we like it when kids play in dirt, but what if that dirt has lead in it? And if they're picking up a toy that now has some lead, some dirt with lead in it, and they're mouthing that toy, that's a direct route of exposure of lead into their systems. And again, we're not typically seeing that type of behavior for an adult. You can also think about like an early sitter or an early crawler. They're spending a lot of time down on the ground, whereas compared to an adult where we might be sitting in a chair or we might be walking around, but we are not spending time low to the ground, where you can see different exposures to chemicals. One example for that would be thinking about wall-to-wall carpet. So typically the glue or the adhesive that's used to hold the carpet down could be releasing chemicals. And if you're a little one sitting on that carpet, you would be breathing in the air quality around the carpet that could be unsafe. If I'm an adult, typically we're sitting on chairs, and just that elevation of a couple feet would make a difference for the amount of exposure to those fumes, just as an example. And then finally, they are proportionally eating more and drinking more than an adult does. We typically are maybe eating 3 times a day, maybe having a few snacks. Kids are very hungry, right? They're eating every 2 hours, they're starving. So they are consuming more than an adult is if you look at like a ratio. Also, we have to think about food variability. So adults are eating many different things. Kids might be in a phase where they only want, chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, or they only want milk, or they only have breast formula. So they have less variability, meaning that we need to make sure that what they're choosing really is healthy for them, or what we're choosing to give them. And an example of that would be thinking about, let's say it's a baby that's having baby formula. We want to make sure that we're mixing that powder with water that has been tested for lead, and it in fact does not have lead in it. So again, just many different things to think about here. All right. So the windows of susceptibility, this is kind of a good slide because it helps us think about kids from the point of inception. So I did start by saying we're thinking about newborns. We are in fact also thinking about kids in utero that are still growing inside mom. The reason that this matters for childcare is obviously a lot of childcare professionals are predominantly women. We know that they are of childbearing years, so they may want to become pregnant, they may be pregnant, they may have just had their baby, but they're still breastfeeding. So we really want to be thinking about the providers also when we think about exposure to potential chemicals. But looking at this slide, it's showing us that the timing of exposure to environmental health hazards really does matter. The dark blue lines that you see horizontally are a highly sensitive period for fetus development. And often mom doesn't even know she's pregnant yet, right? At that point. Also, we want to look at the light blue, the less sensitive period. But all of this, if you look at it, right, is happening or a lot of times in the beginning, mom doesn't even know she's pregnant. So what we want to be doing is making sure that these environments are the safest possible for anybody, so that regardless of whether or not you know you're pregnant, you know you're going into an environment and spending time that has been carefully considering what products and materials are being brought in. Okay, let's go on to the next slide here. So a lot of people wonder, okay, well, why do we really have to talk about the chemicals kind of in our products? Isn't that something that should be monitored by our federal government? And the reality is that there's a lot of work to be done. The good news is people are thinking about this, but there's a lot more work to be done. So the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA, if you've heard about it before, was the primary federal law controlling what chemicals could be in our consumer market, or like our products on the shelves of stores. It was initially passed in 1976 and then implemented in 1979. So it took them 3 years to implement it. And because there were already 80,000 chemicals on the market at that time, we as a country didn't have the time or the money to go through and individually test the 80,000 existing chemicals on the market. So those chemicals were grandfathered in, meaning if they already existed, the powers that be said, okay, let's assume that those are safe. We won't test them, and we'll just keep them within our consumer products. And if we find that they're problematic for human health, then we'll do the testing and we'll remove them. Well, obviously this is problematic, right? To presume something is safe without ever having tested it for impact on human health. And so that has caused a lot of people to be very concerned. The good news is that TSCA was updated in 2016. What that means is that people are realizing, oh, we really need to think about humans and their exposure first. And instead of presuming something is fine. And so what we do now is we are planning, I should say, to be testing these chemicals before use on the consumer market. The problem is it takes a long time to enact change. So even though the updated law was passed in 2016, we still have a lot of work to do. But this is why our program and my job exists, is because you can't really just go to Target, Walmart, purchase on Amazon, and assume that the products that you're purchasing are safe. You instead really have to be thoughtful about what are you purchasing, what's it made out of, and has it been approved by any third-party certification system to really know that they are fully safe to be using. Okay, let's go on to the next one here. Okay, so how are children exposed to chemicals if we know that we need to be concerned and more thoughtful about the products that we're choosing? So some of this we went over a little bit, but for the most part, we as adults are making decisions for the children that we're caring for. So the onus is really on us, right? Because they're trusting us. If we have them in a room with certain toys, the assumption by a child is that I obviously can play with these toys. So first of all, putting the onus on us to be thoughtful of what products are they exposed to. And when I say products, I don't just mean what are they playing with and what are they eating from or drinking from, but what are also the products where they're spending time. So is there carpet on the floor? Is there an area rug? What is it made out of? What's the furniture and carpets? If we do have a bug problem, do we need to be spraying pesticides? Or maybe could we use caulk and just close the entranceway where we can see the bugs are coming in? So again, we want to be thinking about what are they eating for kids? What's the food variability? What are they drinking? If they're drinking water from a tap, has that tap been tested for lead? If they are having baby formula, are we making sure that the water that's being used has been tested for lead? Are we thinking about the baby bottles that they're using, making sure they don't have BPA, bisphenol A plastic? So there's a lot around food and what they're ingesting. We also want to be thinking about skin absorption. So anytime we are putting shampoo or conditioner, bug spray, sunscreen, chapstick, all of those products we want to be thinking about, is this a safe choice for a child? Because that's a direct route of exposure of chemical directly to the child's skin. And again, I talked about it earlier, but we want to think about, where are they spending time? If they're down on the ground, is the ground not only clean, but have we thought about whether or not there is a glue or an adhesive that may be unsafe holding down the flooring or the carpet? So again, I just throw out all of this. There's many different topics we could talk about, but we really want to be thinking about the full variety of what kids can be exposed to. So looking at concerning trends, people will also often say, I don't feel like I remember that people used to be having as many miscarriages, or I don't remember people being as diagnosed with cancer or autism. There seems to be this growing trend of different illnesses, learning disabilities. And the reality is, if you look at the research, we are seeing that there are concerning trends of children's health. And that ultimately we're seeing a higher incidence of people being exposed to things and being diagnosed to things. We've seen increases in asthma, childhood cancer, and neurodevelopmental disorders. Some of these poor health outcomes can be associated with exposure to environmental health hazards. For example, if we think about exposure to air pollution, we know that that's associated with an increased risk of asthma. We know that part of the increase of childhood cancer, those rates are likely due to the changes in patterns of exposure to chemicals that have been introduced in the child's life. So even just thinking about the revolution of plastics, in the 1950s, we introduced plastics. Of course, this is great for like Ziploc bags and keeping our leftover foods, but we also have to think about, well, have those plastics been assessed for impact on human health, i.e., are they safe for us to be using? And what does that mean if we're storing and packaging food and keeping food in these containers? And just so you're not left hanging, the best thing to do for food storage is to use like Pyrex or glass, and not to be using plastic, because over time you have wear and tear, you have small scratches in these plastics, and this is how you have the release of chemicals potentially going into the food or drink that you're saving. So then the last thing here I would just say is, exposure to chemicals such as mercury, lead, arsenic, and pesticides can have negative effects on brain development, leading to cognitive delay, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, lower IQ, higher rates of anxiety and depression, and ultimately be illy impacting the children that we have. So it's not to say that all disabilities and illnesses are directly related to environmental health hazards, i.e. chemicals, but what we know is there is a large intersection of what is your genetic predisposition. So do you have a predisposition to be vulnerable somewhere? And how does that interact with your exposure to heavy metals or chemicals during your phase of development? Okay, so this slide highlights how exposure to environmental hazards like air pollution or lead is associated with poor health outcomes, such as premature birth or asthma. And just really thinking about the example of asthma and its connection to the environment. So when we think about asthma, what might trigger or initiate asthma? It could be tobacco smoke, it could be mold, dust mites, cleaning products, fragrances, pet dander, cockroaches, art supplies. I mean, it could be a variety of different things, but if you yourself have asthma or you know somebody who does, you can think of kind of when it triggers. So for some people, it might be, let's say they're cleaning the bathtub or they're using bleach and all of a sudden they're starting to get a headache, they can't breathe as well. That could be something that's triggering asthma. That also could just be being too close to a chemical and you're breathing it in and it's unhealthy for you. But we want to be thinking about the fact that percentage of children with asthma has doubled in the past 2 decades and is now the #1 cause of school absenteeism. And so, that's something we want to think about, is if you are exposed to something like a chemical at your school or childcare, it's causing asthma, then you're absent and you're not there, then what's the amount of learning that's lost, right? Because you're at home on the couch and you're not with your little friends and being exposed to all of the various learning opportunities. So just thinking about those compounding effects. All right. Also, we know that there are inequities, right, in health outcomes for Black, Latinx, and Indigenous children. We know that certain populations of low-income populations often have higher, greater risk for exposures to pollution and higher levels of contaminants in their bodies, and more illness or disability as a result of longstanding U.S. racist economic, environmental, and educational policies. So we want to be really paying attention to the fact that these racist policies result in hazardous waste sites, polluting facilities, poor quality housing stock, being located in or near neighborhoods with high concentrations of certain populations, including Black folks, brown or indigenous people. And so it's not a fair layout, right? We really want to be thinking about those communities that are most marginalized. Where are they spending time? And are they in close proximity to something that could be really negatively impacting their health? So the easiest kind of example is thinking about a fence line community. Who are the communities that are right next to maybe industry that's releasing pollutants that is unsafe for those communities? So just really thinking about, what can we do to be uplifting individuals where they can't change their location? Let's say they're not going to change the location of their housing or their schools. We can still make better decisions within those environments where maybe we're improving the air quality or providing them with better products to be around. So really just elevating, we want to be thinking of all communities and how people are around different things within their areas. Okay. So looking more specifically now to what are the chemicals within childcare facilities, we first of all know that more research needs to be done. There has been a lot more research looking at chemical exposures and heavy metal exposures within school environments. And there have been some studies looking at childcare, but we need to do more. So one example is there was a study in 2014 by a colleague of ours, Asa Bradman in California, where they tested the dust of 40 different childcare cities just in California. 40 different childcare centers. All of the dust samples had flame retardant chemicals. So flame retardant chemicals are a class of chemicals that are added to products to basically decrease the burn time so that things don't burn as quickly. The problem with this, right, is that those chemicals are not healthy for individuals. And so we knew that all of the dust samples contained flame retardants. We know that phthalates were detected in 100% of air and dust samples. Phthalates are a class of chemicals that are used to basically make plastic softer. So if you think about like a rubber ducky or a bath book, the flexibility of let's say a shower curtain or like a bounce ball, a blow-up ball, all of those items have phthalates in them. And we know from our research that phthalates and exposure to these chemicals is relational to endocrine disruption, which means reproductive harm. So we found that these were universally in all childcare facilities that were tested. Again, it's a small sample size. It was only 40. But what we know is true, kind of if you bop around from different childcare facilities, often you see the same types of materials, right? So our job is how do we do better at having to identify those materials that are not ideal and see what we can offer as substitutions. So after all of this, right, which is very overwhelming, you're thinking of all these possible exposures. This slide is very important. So looking at these concentric circles, is the environment to blame for all illness and disability? I would say absolutely not, but it does play a role. So science tells us that environmental hazards like air pollution have a role in our children's life. We talked about that before, right? There's many different things that could be impacting outdoor air pollution or indoor air pollution. But when we look at the health of an individual child, we know, first of all, closest to them are their genetics. So what are they born with as far as maybe having some vulnerability to certain chemicals, or maybe what are their strengths? We know parenting is super important, economic factors. So how much money does the family have to be able to contribute to maybe their health and safety, their clothing, where they're spending time, their education, what's their healthcare quality and housing. But then you really also notice here that on the biggest circle on the outside is the environment. And so one of the reasons it's on the outside is because it's an all-encompassing statement. But from what we've said at this point in the webinar, there are many different things where we spend our time with chemicals involved, and how those chemicals intersect with a human's exposure can have a negative outcome or can have a positive outcome. And so at the end of this webinar, what we're hoping to do is partner with you all in thinking more critically about what do we have the power to change? And is that maybe just doing something a little bit safer where you're not purchasing anything differently, but you're having people wipe their feet off more before they come into a childcare facility? Or maybe you are institutionalizing an anti-idling policy where people need to turn off their cars or their engines at pickup and drop off so you don't have all of this extra exhaust going out right at the level where children are spending time. Could it be a consideration to have like a no shoe policy in an infant toddler room only? So there are a lot of different strategies we can think about that really cost no money. It's just a matter of making a difference in your policies. Okay, so what can we do collectively? We can take steps to protect kids where they're living, they're learning and playing. We talked about this early on. Where are they spending time, outside at a playground? Where are they spending time in your childcare facility? How are they being transported in the car? Do you have like a little fragrance thing that's hanging? And is that releasing chemicals that might not be safe? So we want to be thinking about where are they spending their time and what are the changes that we can make. Okay, so one of the strategies that we have and that we've supported childcare facilities with is offering a checklist or an endorsement. So we have a 35-item checklist. It's a self-audit, and individual facilities can go through these items and comply with 30 out of 35 best practices. If you meet that criteria, then the Children's Environmental Health Network acknowledges that you're going above and beyond what's required by childcare licensing standards or by national accreditation, and we endorse you for 2 years. So it's kind of like a stamp of approval, and we hope then that you will take our resources, take our logo, and really go market yourself as going above and beyond what's required. And this is important because we are collectively elevating the fact that environmental health or reducing chemical exposures is part of health and safety. We knew that we need to do that to make sure that kids are safe. I mean, picture just like underneath a kitchen sink or a bathroom sink. Obviously, we're all using those like child locks when you have infant and toddlers, because having a child be exposed to all of those chemicals could be life-threatening and at least detrimental to their health. So what we're doing is on a larger scale, thinking about how do we reduce kids' exposure to those chemicals, because we certainly wouldn't let them play with those bottles, right, that we're finding underneath the kitchen sink. So at this point, we've supported over 2,700 individual facilities in becoming endorsed. And again, this is something you could opt into because it's a self-audit. And that's impacting over 70,000 children. We give you the QR code here, but in a slide or two, I'm going to show you a picture of it. So the topics that we cover, we have 16 different content categories, and not just the checklist, but we also have a variety of different fact sheets that are available in English and Spanish. They're all free, they're online. We welcome you to share them with the parents that you're serving or your colleagues. Household chemicals would be one category that's just thinking about what are you cleaning with, sanitizing and disinfecting, that kind of thing. Looking at lead, we're thinking about, okay, is there lead in the water, consumer products, soil, or paint? So each of these categories goes into a variety of more succinct information. And what we do is always try to educate you about, all right, what's the health concern here? What could we be doing alternatively? And if we do have an alternative, is there something that could be done that's at a reasonable cost or completely free? Okay, so here's just giving you a snapshot of the resources that we have. The thing that's the farthest to the front on the right-hand side is the checklist. Again, there's a QR code there, but there's 35 items. You would comply with 30 over 35 to become endorsed. This takes facilities sometimes a couple weeks, sometimes a couple months, depending on how much you're working through the items and at what rate. I usually encourage people to do 1 item a week because that seems feasible. And then you'll see here we have these various other materials that are fact sheets or frequently asked questions that provide more information about each specific topic from the checklist. We also have an e-learning course that I have coming up here in another slide or two, but one person from each endorsed facility must take that course to kind of have a deeper understanding of why are we making these changes and what, in fact, can we do better on. This e-learning course costs $30. It is approved for adult learning clock hours in all 50 states. So if you take the course, it would count towards your professional development that's required. And people usually love it because it's not a course that they've taken before. It's kind of a different thing than they've talked about before with topics. We also have this lead safe toolkit. So again, this is completely free. This is the link for you here. And ultimately this, I'm going to go into it a little bit more here in this webinar, but this toolkit is helping you to either adopt a policy around testing and remediating for lead, or providing you with worksheets so that you know exactly what to do, because it can become overwhelming pretty quickly. And here I'll break into it a little bit more. Okay, so in the lead toolkit, just as an example, we have 4 main categories. The toolkit is divided into lead in paint, lead in drinking water, lead in soil, and lead in consumer products. These are the 4 exposure pathways to having exposure to lead for an adult or for a child. Okay, oops, sorry. So each of the 4 categories contains a sample policy that you can adopt for your business and share with the families you serve. And we know that there's a ton for you guys to keep up on. And so ultimately we wanted to create these policies which detail kind of the best practice commitments that could be added to a handbook. So certainly you could adjust this and tweak it however you want, but we heard from a lot of providers that it would be helpful if they could just take something once they've made changes within their facility about testing and remediating for lead, and then just have a policy that they could show the parents that they're serving. And so just think about that there's a policy pertaining to each of the exposure pathways within the toolkit. Along with each policy is a worksheet, and this helps you set the policy into action one step at a time. So each worksheet gives you valuable information about the importance of ensuring that homes are lead safe, and gives the approximate costs of the recommended steps to reduce lead exposure either in a home or a child care facility. And again, each of the 4 categories, from lead exposure to paint, water, soil, and consumer products, have a unique policy and a unique worksheet. The worksheets are longer documents. They're more comprehensive. They offer detailed information about how to go about making changes. But really the best thing is they're going step by step, telling you distinctly what to do to make a change. Links to resources and contacts that you can consult as you implement the policy are provided. And then also on YouTube, we have a 4-part webinar series. They're just about 30 minutes each, and they go specifically through each kind of exposure pathway. Okay, now we're going to shift a little bit and show you kind of the alignment that we have between our checklist and our resources and the items or the standards that you find within your essentials handbook. So this is pretty fun and cool too. All right, so these items are items that exist currently and have to do with indoor safety within the Essentials Handbook. So you guys are already thinking about smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, right? Making sure that they have the adequate batteries. Are they being maintained? No flammable furnishings. So that is something that's, you know, it's kind of a general statement. So we would have more information within our resources of, okay, if I'm trying to make sure I have no flammable furnishings, what does that really mean? And we would say you want to be choosing materials that are like solid wood. If you are looking for area rugs, you'd want to be thinking about things that are made out of natural materials. So cotton or hemp or wool, for example, because these burn much less quickly. And then you also are not having to coat the material with some kind of flammable chemical, which is good in its intent, but the problem with it is, well, what is it off-gassing or releasing into the air for years as a spray that's supposed to be helping us from being exposed to fire should it potentially ever happen. Also, we have in the Essentials Handbook that the environment is smoke-free, it's lead-free and toxin-free. This is a great standard, but again, the challenge is, well, what does that exactly mean? And we have within our resources very concrete information to help you think about, well, how do I actually make sure I'm a lead-free environment? Toxic-free is a huge, kind of very big term, but we help you think about, okay, what are the pesticides that I might be using? Do I really need to use those? Or again, maybe what are my cooking materials or the eating products that the kids are using? These are some other ones. So thinking about your HVAC system, right? So your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning unit. How do we make sure that we're maintaining those to make sure that we do have good and safe indoor air quality within facilities? We want to make sure that you guys have a smoke alarm. Again, this is all great so that you're thinking about making sure that you can trigger a carbon monoxide detector or smoke alarm should something bad happen. Toys and equipment having no sharp edges, chipped paint, lead paint. And again, you can be going to our resources that are free for more specific information about what to think about with toys if you're trying to make sure that they're lead free. One example I can give you is any kind of old or antique toy you might have up for decoration, but I certainly wouldn't give that to kids because oftentimes they could be made out of lead. You maybe have seen those heavy lead little cars before, or the little army guys. So that would not be good for children to play with. Another example is thinking about those, they're like kind of bathtub toys. That's a stacking where it goes red, orange, green, you know, all the way up to yellow. Certain of those colors have more lead in them because of the brightness of the color. I believe it's red and yellow are the problematic ones, but knowing that you wouldn't want that toy at all within your materials. So again, there's a lot more detail that you can get within our resources if you're looking for better suggestions. Okay, here the Essentials Handbook is talking about cleaning supplies, bleach, making sure that things are in their original container, out of reach of children. Absolutely, we say the same thing. We go into greater detail saying, okay, if you're going to be choosing a bleach, make sure that you are really paying attention to that ratio of bleach to water. Often we've seen childcare providers maybe not mixing as carefully as they could because if extra bleach gets in there, they just think that they're being even cleaner with their environments. We come from the vantage point of thinking, well, more bleach is not necessarily better because it's really just more caustic for the lungs that are breathing it in. So it's very important to measure that out. You also want to make sure that you're choosing cleaning materials that are fragrance free. Anytime fragrance, you know, yes, it smells like lemons or oranges or lavender. The problem is these chemicals are being added to these cleaning materials to make them smell good. But a lot of times we don't know what chemicals were used to make that fragrance. Fragrance is considered a proprietary information. That means the manufacturer doesn't have to release the list of fragrance. You guys can go home tonight, pick up your favorite bottle of lotion or shampoo. It will say the word fragrance on the back. It will not give you the ingredients as to what that means. And we know often there's benzene, which is cancer causing in fragrance, and there are phthalates. And I told you about phthalates before, making plastic soft and pliable, but phthalates are also used to bind fragrances. So it's like a chemical that helps the smell stay longer in the shampoo that you're using. So all to say it would be better to avoid buying anything with fragrances at all in the products that you're using within your facility. All right, let's see here, going on a little bit more. Okay, so cushioning material, this is thinking about like what's outside on your playground. We do have a whole portion of the checklist and a fact sheet just about playground equipment and thinking about what's the structure made out of, what's underneath made out of. Certainly we want to keep kids safe if they fall down, but we also want to be thinking about what's the material made out of. An example of an unsafe material would be like crumb rubber. So just old tires that are turned into like that soft landing pad. Yes, it's softer for the children, but the problem is we know that it often can be releasing cancer-causing chemicals. And the problem too is with hot weather, the more that all heats up, the more that we could be breathing in the chemicals that are being released as that material is degrading in the heat. So let me see one more here. It's just thinking about an area being away from glass, standing water, animal waste. We have a lot of information also just thinking about standing water makes me think of pesticides. So a lot of times you might have like little bugs around standing water, right? What we talk about is integrated pest management. So if there are pests around, why are those pests being drawn to your specific environment? And it most likely is because you are making it hospitable. You're making it maybe friendly by giving them crumbs of food or standing water, or maybe it's a warm environment, so they're coming into your house, or it's a cool environment, so they want to get away from the heat. And so we're often thinking about, okay, we need to be a little bit cleaner with the crumbs. We need to caulk the cracks that they're coming in on, and trying to remove any kind of standing water so that it's not attractive for a pest. Okay, looking at a couple ones here. The first one, ensuring rooms are ventilated, is very important. Natural ventilation could just be opening screened windows and doors. The more you can open windows, the better, because then you have cross ventilation, the cross flow of air from one window to the next across a room. If you are in an area where it's maybe unsafe to open a window because of temperatures, or because of maybe you're in an urban area and roadways and off-gassing from just the fumes coming out of cars, then we want to be thinking about HVAC maintenance again, and just making sure that we have equipment that's being checked regularly and maintained by janitors. Room temperature is very important, because if places are moist and warm, that can lead to the growth of mold and mildew. And once mold or mildew sets in, it's very difficult to remove. So the biggest thing there is just trying to keep rooms as dry as possible. Your laundry room, your bathroom, and your kitchen are the rooms that have the most amount of moisture. So again, just making sure you're opening windows and doors when you can. If you cannot, making sure you're checking your fans. People often talk about, like, if you have a ceiling fan, you would put a little, what do you call it? Like a Kleenex up against the fan and see if the fan is pulling it up. If it is, then that's a sign that it's working. And if not, then it might need to be cleaned. Lining trash cans is a great idea. Again, this is a way to make sure that we are keeping trash away from the rodents and insects that could be interested in it. And obviously taking it out as much as you can. This says at the end of each day. I would even say more than that if you have some dirty diapers and this kind of thing in it. Looking here at a couple more examples. So looking at the exhaust system of ventilation. Ventilation is so important. I think people keep going back to that because you may have heard before of like the sick building syndrome. If people are spending time, adults or children, in a building or an environment that does not have safe and clean air, you start to feel kind of junky, right? Because you're not thinking well, you're getting a headache, you feel lethargic. So it's very important to just be thinking about, how do you improve your air quality? And it could be maintaining a ventilation system, opening screen doors, but it also could be paying attention to what are the products that you're bringing into that environment that could be making it less healthy. And so an example of that, again, is trying to choose products that don't have fragrance in them, making sure that when you're choosing products, you're not using aerosol, but instead like a wipe or a direct spray. I'm going to keep us moving here to make sure I get through all my slides. Okay. So this again is the checklist. So what I was just trying to do is show you the alignment between the Essentials Handbook and the various standards within it through the Council Professional Recognition, and then also thinking out through our checklist. That's why we decided to join forces this year, and we have this collaborative grant. So I would encourage you to think about going through our 35-item checklist. Again, it takes time. I can assure you when you read through it, you'll probably already be adhering to maybe 5 to 10 of them, depending on where you're at. And then slowly thinking about how do you make different decisions, and using the other resources that we have, such as the fact sheet or the frequently asked questions, to help you understand why are you making the change, and actually how do you make it better in a way that's cost effective. So these are, I won't have time to go through all of them because I want to open it up for questions, but these are some of our specific standards that align with what I just went through from the Essentials Handbook. So again, just thinking about ventilation and water leaks and this sort of thing. This one is just, again, thinking about cooking, cleaning, and art activities, and ventilation, screen windows for ventilation. These are other ideas we mentioned earlier. So an anti-idling policy is a great way to reduce chemicals coming into your buildings in the morning and at pickup when parents are out there collecting and dropping off their children, choosing things that are fragrance free, and obviously prohibiting smoking, even for your employees, asking them to go and do that out of the sight of children, and then potentially removing like an outer garment or a smoking jacket so that they're not bringing smoke in with their clothing as secondhand smoke, and then picking up a child. This is looking at lead prevention best practices. And as you know, we have that full toolkit. And again, everything is now also in Spanish. These are other items that pertain to lead. I think of 35 items, 9 of them pertain to lead on our checklist. That's how important it is. This is interesting. I didn't go over this yet today, but a lot of our imported or handmade or old pottery can have a glaze on it that has lead within it. So sometimes you'll pick up like a really pretty dish at Home Goods or something like that, and it'll say for decorative uses only. That's a pretty good indication that it could have lead in it or something else that's unsafe for food to be offered in it. So these kind of items, if you love it, I say keep it for decoration. Just don't be using it for food or drink. These are other ways to kind of combat what kind of chemicals could be found in soil. So covering on the basis of your playground equipment area, maybe using mulch or ground cover. And again, we give you specifics within our fact sheets, and making sure you're using a walk-off mat in the beginning. So when people come in, they're moving the excess dirt and dust off of their feet. With that, I'm going to pause. We only have 5 minutes for questions, but I'm happy to answer them. We're hoping that this webinar is exciting for people to come and learn more. So I will be at the council's conference in October in Houston, and we will be doing a 9 a.m. session that's for a general session, and then also a concurrent session at 3:15. And with that, I'm going to pause and see what questions there are. And Victoria and Katora, feel free to jump in.
I just want to say thank you so much, Hester. This was such, I felt like I'm familiar with the content, but this was also enlightening for me. I learned a lot. I feel like we're going to have a separate conversation around how we can distill this information and share it out again. Because I feel like you can have at least half of the hour on Q&A. But thank you so much. Looking forward to having you present at the Early Educators Leadership Conference, and expand people's minds and insights around environmental toxins and how to better support safe environments for young children. Thanks for everybody that joined us today.
Great, thank you.
If anyone has questions, you can just hop off mute or put your questions in the chat.
I have a question. Is it possible for the links to the checklist and the other resources that you mentioned? Could you please put that in the chat?
So here, Katora, maybe I can email them to you after. We had to do a weird concoction of me using someone else's screen today. So I don't have the ability to drop them into the chat, but I'm happy to send those links to Katora and Veronica, and maybe they can send them on afterwards for those who registered.
Yes, we will do that. So for everyone who attended, we will send you those links directly. You should receive them via email, the associated email with your CAN account. Great question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Hester, do you have any final thoughts?
I would just say we encourage you to come to the sessions that are live. It'll be, I think even better when we can be all together. But yeah, if you enjoyed this and you found it interesting, please tell your colleagues to come and attend at least the general session, I would say, on October 6th. And we're excited to be part of the conference.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.